Hello students, let us talk about plastics. These are the topics that I'm going to take up which are usually not considered in our regular lectures. So this platform has been opened up for us to understand those issues which can supplement our efforts on understanding the subjects related to civil services. So my objective behind these videos are basically to ensure that we are able to cover and go one step beyond than what we normally cover in our class lectures, and also supplement the efforts that we have been taking in understanding the various issues on civil services, various issues important to civil services. So let us start with our first topic for today. It is plastics. Now, this is undoubtedly the most important material, the most favorite material that we have. We can't imagine our life without plastics today. And the way we are dependent on plastic, I hope this is needless to say that it has become the biggest polluting agent for both our waters and soil. Now, when you try to talk about plastics, this itself is a much larger and much broader topic to discuss. So I have particularly taken up a small issue related to plastic in this video, and based on your comments and requirements, we'll be taking up other issues related to plastics as well in following videos. So let us start with the first video on plastic, which helps us to identify what types of plastics we have. And we'll also be looking at a relatable question in the previous year UPSC exams related to the topic. So let us start. So this image that you can see in my background, it is what our real world is today. We are producing almost 26,000 tons of plastics almost on a daily basis just in India, right? On top of that, we are adding up so much of plastic waste across the world, which is eventually being ended up into landfills, into various other, into oceans. One of the biggest reason for marine pollution is plastic, you guys know this. And on top of that, it is also causing a huge problem in soil pollution as well. Now, when you talk about plastics in general, if you want me to define what plastics are nothing but long chain polymers of carbon based compounds, as simple as this. If for UPSC perspective, we may not have to look very deep in understanding exactly what are plastics, but to have a preliminary outlook about plastics, we can simply consider that they are nothing but long chains of carbon based compounds. So when they are carbon based compounds, it means that these compounds must be having carbon inside them, and it is fairly obvious that whenever any carbon based compounds undergoes degradation, it will obviously produce carbon dioxide, right? So remember, whenever plastic pollution comes, or if it is asked in civil service exams in any way, relatable one gas that can be directly related to any kind of plastic pollution is CO2. But of course, other gases may also be formed, some nitrogenous gases may also be released, but CO2 will of course be released in all types of plastics, because carbon still remains as the primary element in every plastic. And as carbon is the primary element, we can obviously say that fossil fuels, they play a very important role, right? In fact, fossil fuels are the main source from which carbon is added into the plastics. So fossil fuels are usually made up of carbon and hydrogen. They are called hydrocarbons, and they are the biggest agent that is eventually helping in creating more and more plastics. So every plastic will naturally have a very high combustible properties. They can burn easily. There could be some exceptions at the same time, but at the same time, we can have plastics, whenever they degrade, they often release carbon and hydrogen based gases. Now, when you talk about the types of plastics, in a preliminary point of view, we can say plastics are of two types. One is called thermoplastics, and the other one is called thermosetting plastics. Thermoplastics are basically those plastics which can easily be softened, and they can easily be molded into whichever shape we want, right? They can be softened n number of times using the right temperature and humidity, and they can be molded in whichever condition you want. At the same time, we have thermosetting plastics. Thermosetting plastics are basically those which once crafted, they cannot be remolded, they cannot be softened. And this is the kind of plastic that is often used for making utensils. You might have heard melamine utensils in your houses, and this is also used for making your electrical switches, which are made up of bakelite plastics. These both are examples of thermosetting plastics. But having this much of understanding of plastic is not complete from UPSC perspective. So we have to go one step ahead, and in the modern world, we classify plastic in a much more detailed and a much more holistic manner. So we have something called the Resin International Identification Code, It's an international identification code which was adopted in the year 1988, and all countries are expected to identify plastic and their their substitute resins in the form of the identification code mentioned under RIC. It is called Resin Identification Code. The objective behind this identification code is so that we can identify plastics across the world in a very static kind of a classification, and at the same time this can also help us in better recycling of the same plastic, right? So once the identification is clear, the material recovery can improve because we would know how to segregate different types of plastics, and once the material recovery is improved, the recyclability will also be much better. I hope you guys can understand. Then let's start with the first kind of classification when it comes to the resin identification code. So they have identified total 7 types of plastics, out of which the first type is known as PET. Now PET basically stands for polyethylene terephthalate. This is right now the world's most widely used form of plastic for food packaging, right? Most kinds of food and drink packaging, they are mostly done in PET bottles, and surprisingly PET is not considered to be a very dangerous kind of plastic as well because of its high recyclability. It is also one of the most widely recycled plastic in the world. In fact, you'll be surprised to know many of our clothes that we see these days, clothes like fleece, backpacks, carpets, in fact, many of the fashion attires that are quite popular around us, they are, somewhat made by recycling the PET bottles into fibers, into tiny fibers that can eventually be woven into any kind of cloth. Right. In fact, these days it has become a quite popular, trend of, using plastic recycled clothes. Right. The transforming of PET can be done into flakes, and from these flakes we can eventually spin them into a yarn, and that can eventually be used into making any kind of attires. So this pictorial image can help you in identifying few types of plastics that we have, a few examples of PET bottles. Then the next type of plastic we have is called high density polyethylene. High density polyethylene is another very popular type of plastic. After PET, high density polyethylene is also quite popular. Not the second most popular, but the third most popular plastic around us. So it is often used in making grocery bags, recycling bins, agricultural pipes, playground equipments, lids, and shampoo. Now because of this, it's soft and very you can say because of its soft nature, it can easily have a high thermal resistance, but it is also recycle friendly because it can be molded into different forms. So it is one of the easiest material to be recycled. It shows high thermal resistance, and it can easily be recycled into non-food applications. See, I hope you understand, in order to recycle HDPE, we have to first understand that high density polyethylene, if it is mixed with certain pigments during the time of the first crafting, then those pigmented plastics, they may release some kinds of chemicals into the plastic that it may not be used for carrying food or food articles anymore. So non-food packaging is something which is quite popular for HDPE, high density polyethylene bottles, such as detergent, motor oil, household cleaners, film packaging, pipes, lawn products, etc. These are the major products which are quite popularly used, made up of HDPE, high density polyethylene. Even the recycled HDPE is also quite popularly being used for these things. Then we have PVC, another very popular plastic material. It is so popular in construction industries that today PVC has been able to replace wood, ceramics, and many other traditional, building materials with their strength and their quality, right? So when you talk about PVCs, they are largely used for building and construction industries. They can be both rigid and flexible. Usually the PVCs are considered to be highly rigid. So they can be used in doors, window profiles. You can make drinking water or wastewater pipes out of PVCs, and it can be made softer by adding some additives. So you can add certain additives into it, and you can even make them softer. And when you make them softer, it can be used for making wires, plumbing equipment, and also electrical cables, insulation and such things. So PVC is having a very high utility these days, but mind my word, this is a disclaimer for you, PVC has very poor recyclability. Its recyclability is very poor, and it is one of my honest advice. In fact, you can understand this conversation I'm having mostly to give you not just an idea towards UPSC, but also to make you a responsible consumer. So next time whenever you look for any kind of plastic, do identify what kind of plastic it is. So if it is made up of PVC, then I would tell you to avoid using those plastics because that will have a very poor recyclability. Although its applications are quite high, but remember that there are certain alternatives available every time when you can find a better alternative from in the form of HDPE or some other pipe. I hope you guys are able to understand. So recyclability of PVC is somewhat less. Then comes LDPE, low density polyethylene. Low density polyethylenes are basically those kind of plastics which are similar to HDPE, but as the name suggests, they have lower density, so they are usually thinner, softer. Now these are very popular. In fact, they have been the biggest constituent to single-use plastics, and because of their thin and weaker nature, their recyclability is possible but not preferred. So it is possible to recycle them, but it is not economically preferable. Their final costing is usually more than the original plastic itself. So usually I would again suggest you not to use low density plastic wherever possible. So normally you will find the various containers, dispensing bottles, plastic bags. Those are the ones which are usually having low density polyethylene plastics. Then apart from this, we have polypropylene. Polypropylene is another kind of plastic quite popular around us. This is the kind of plastic which is the second most widely produced plastics, and this plastic is very extensively used in machine parts or making rigid or robust parts. Because of their hard and robust nature and high thermal resistance, they have a very high utility in car, in machine parts, in car equipments and such things. But remember, their recyclability is also quite difficult and very expensive. So again, polypropylene is something that should be avoided as much as possible, right? See, you might have heard what is the normal strategy, how do we manage our waste? As being a consumer of plastic, the normal strategy of managing our waste is we normally put our waste on the curbside. We call these programs like curbside programs. What are curbside programs? See, you must have noticed that normally, a person for garbage collection comes to our doorsteps, and from the doorsteps, it eventually goes and put or dumps that garbage into some particular garbage container or some particular garbage storage site. And those garbage storage sites are the places from where the local municipality will pick up and carry all the garbage and will eventually take it away, right, for material recovery and other things. So you can understand that whenever it comes to our garbage collection, we are heavily dependent on a simple curbside program. So curbsides are basically those identified sites where people go and put all their garbage, and the local municipality can pick up those garbage from those particular sites. So that's how the normal waste management system in our country works. So you can do a little test here that you can take and put different kinds of plastics. You would notice that the curbside program professionals, they will also be knowing that which plastic has a much higher recyclability. So you notice that they would very less likely are going to prefer to pick up polypropylene. But PET and HDPE, they will easily be able to pick it up because they are easy to recycle and the recycling cost is also not very high. So polypropylene, I would suggest you to avoid, although it is used in making Tupperware parts, car parts, yogurt containers, and even disposable diapers. Then after this, the worst of all kinds of plastic. The worst kind of plastic is what is known as polystyrene, or famously known as thermocol or styrofoam. Right? This is the kind of plastic that has now been banned in the country. I hope you understand. Beverage cups, insulations, packing materials, egg cartons and disposables. These are the kind of things that has been banned significantly, not entirely, but significantly they have been banned, and they are now considered to be one of the worst type of, environmentally, they are considered to be one of the worst type of plastics, right? The foam, because they are mostly foam like, so they are lighter, they keep floating in the water, right? And they are highly inflammable, so they can release harmful chemicals, and because of their foamy or their pervious nature, they can easily allow the dangerous chemicals to even leach out, right? Environmentally, it is considered to be one of the worst kind of plastic, and literally they have no recyclability. So once it is produced, it will remain in the environment, will keep damaging the environment without any recyclability. Now, the seventh classification that the RIC model says, it is related to some other kinds of plastics. So here I have covered two different types of plastic, although there could be many more. One is called polycarbonates. Polycarbonates are basically those plastics which are used in making lenses, sunglasses, or sports eyewears. Compact disc construction sheets are mostly made up of polycarbonates. mind my words, these polycarbonates again have no recyclability. They have literally no recyclability. They cannot be recycled, or even if you try to even if you try to recycle them, then in that case, its possibility of recycling would be very expensive. Then apart from this, polytetrafluoroethylene, it is what is known as Teflon. Teflon is something which is a very popularly used plastic used in your outer coverings of the utensils, and this is something that is quite popular. But again, normally Teflon is something which one should avoid, especially when you consider two kinds of chemicals. Remember these two chemicals that are mentioned here. As a responsible and informed consumer, these chemicals may be very important for you, right? Whenever you try to buy any kind of plastic product, please try to make sure that the plastic should not contain BPA, also known as bisphenol A, and it should not also not contain any kind of phthalates. See, phthalates are basically those chemicals that are deliberately added in different kinds of plastics to improve their rigidity, flexibility, and durability. But these phthalates, they undergo thermal disintegration very easily. At high temperature, they break down very easily, and eventually they can even be causing cancer, right? In fact, you might have heard last year there was a study in Italy that has confirmed the presence of phthalate and other plastic molecules in the breast milk of the mothers, right? Even in the mother's milk, we have found phthalates and plastic residues, and it is considered to be causing acute stunting of growth and even can cause, other kinds of health ailments in future. WHO itself has considered phthalates and BPAs are very dangerous, severe, health concerns used in plastics world over. BPA is called bisphenol A, and this is basically one of the leading cause of aquatic and landfill pollution, right? So this gets leached into the soil and the and aquatic bodies, causing a lot of ailments and a lot of pollution in those bodies. So try to make sure that all the products that you buy, they should be free from phthalates and free from BPA. I hope you guys were able to understand the 7 types of plastics. Now, if I go ahead and let's talk about recyclability. Now, recyclability is something which is a very important aspect related to plastics. No discussion on plastic can be complete if we do not talk about recyclability. So I have discussed which of the past plastics are recycled. In general, you can consider 2 types of plastics. One is PET and HDPE to be recyclable plastics. But at the same time, there are some miscellaneous or some new trends that are coming up in plastic these days, which one should obviously know considering the UPSC perspective. So there is a challenge that we are able to identify between recycled and virgin plastics. Now, recycled plastics are the ones which are made from the previous types that we have discussed already, and they have been recycled into different forms. But what are virgin plastics? Virgin plastics are basically, to put it simply, they are plastics in their purest form. See, normally we keep putting some additives in normally any kind of plastics to improve their properties. To improve some of their properties, we keep adding certain kinds of additives in almost every kind of plastic. But at the same time, if you take the purest form of plastic, we call it virgin plastics. Now the challenge is that when you compare the cost of virgin plastics with that of the newly recycled plastics, if the cost of virgin plastic is going to be cheaper, then you can understand it will be very difficult to convince governments world over that recycled plastic should be preferred over virgin plastic. So right now in India, virgin plastic has not been banned. So recyclability holds this challenge as well. And like I have many times said in the class, technology alone can never bring change. Policies and market has to be there to support it. So when we have the right kind of policies in support of recycled plastic over virgin plastic, we can definitely ensure that the recyclability will improve and we'll be able to maintain a much cleaner tomorrow. I hope you are able to understand. Apart from that, there are some other trending plastics which are there in popular discussions. One is called bioplastics. Bioplastics technically are plastics that can be degraded, that are biodegradable as the name suggests. But these bioplastics, they could be made up of biofuels, they could be derived from fossil fuels, and they are usually, biodegradable in nature. Oxo-degradable plastics are basically those plastics which are normal plastics only. Normal polluting plastics are oxo-degradable plastics, but they have been added with some impurities, or they have been added with some chemicals which can lead to faster degradation of the normal plastics. So we add certain chemicals in oxo-degradable plastics which helps in faster decomposition of these plastics. We call them oxo-degradable plastics. Of course, they are slightly better preferred than the previous kinds of plastics. And lastly, we have the more popular ones known as compostable plastics. Now, compost, you understand, in Hindi we call it khad. It's a kind of a material that can help in improving or conditioning of the overall soil, can improve the quality of soil. Compostable plastics. Now, compostable plastics are basically those which can be degraded into a compost. That means they will be releasing certain chemicals that can improve in soil conditioning. But compostable plastic, also remember that these plastics are not biodegradable, that you can throw it anywhere on the streets and be irresponsible while managing them. No, compostable plastics also sometimes may require a proper composting facility. So recovery of these plastics, it doesn't mean that if bioplastic is degradable or oxo-degradable plastics are there, then we can have the liberty of being irresponsible and continue with our lives. No, that's never the case. Even when you talk about bioplastics or oxo-degradable or compostable plastics, a proper recovery of plastic is very important. Their proper disposal is still very important. Otherwise, even they can be very dangerous. I hope you guys are able to understand. So these were the important points which I have tried to cover in the first discussion related to plastics. Give me your comments so that we can understand and create more informative videos of similar nature. We can cover plastic waste management rules. We can also cover other issues related to plastics. Now, let us look at one of the previous year questions that have been asked related to one of these topics that we have just now discussed. Let's see if you guys can able to answer. With reference to polyethylene terephthalate, the use of which is so widespread in our daily lives, consider the following statements. Point number 1, it says its fibers can be blended with wool and cotton fibers to reinforce their properties. Of course, we have just now seen that it's a very popularly used fiber, right? So first point seems to be correct. Second point, containers made of it can be used to store any alcoholic beverage. Now, this is the point that we haven't discussed in our discussions. We haven't discussed in our recent discussions, but you can use your common sense. Mostly alcohols are carried in glass bottles, right? But yes, alcohols can also be carried in plastic bottles, like some kind of alcohol used for medicated purposes. For spirits, they can be carried in plastic bottles as well. But here, I would suggest you to emphasize a little on the word any kind of alcoholic beverage. So usually alcoholic beverages are normally not placed in plastic containers, and because of few reasons, that alcohol being a volatile substance, it can easily vaporize, and normally the PET bottles, they are impervious to oxygen. They do not allow oxygen to move in, but alcohol can still vaporize beyond plastic. So usually they avoid. Okay, but let's see, even if we do not know about this particular point, let's see if the elimination method can help us here or not. Then the third point says bottles made of this plastic can be recycled into other products. Yes, this also is very correct. We have already heard that shoes, bags, and so many other things are now made up of PET. So first and 3 seems to be correct. And the last point is articles made of it can be easily disposed by incineration or by simple burning without causing greenhouse gas emissions. I hope you guys understand this is definitely an incorrect point. Like I already mentioned, all plastics are carbon-based compounds. So if you have a carbon-based compounds being used, it's fairly obvious greenhouse gases will definitely be released, right? So point number 4 is obviously incorrect. Point number 1 and point number 3 is obviously correct. Let's see which all options can fit in. So when you look at the options, it is very clear that option A is the right answer. Option 1 and 3. So that will be everything in today's video. Please give me a comment and let's see if we can make this platform a much bigger and much more learning and interactive platform. Thank you guys. All the best.